Bune Audio Network.
I'm never going to give up. I'm never going to give up. We have to find her.
I'm Katie Corman, a reporter with Fox 2 in St. Louis. We've been looking into a more than 13-year-old missing persons case. Amanda Jones was a 26-year-old woman from Jefferson County, Missouri, when she disappeared on August 14th, 2005. Amanda was 8.5 months pregnant, days away from giving birth to her second child, and her family is still desperate for answers. If you've been following along with our Fox 2 podcast, you've already heard about Amanda. Her family, her friends have told us the kind of person she was. We know how she met the man she believed to be the father of her unborn child, and we know about the timeline of that last day that anyone saw her. My colleague Andy Banker and I have been revisiting this case, looking into what happened then, what has happened since, and trying to just see what new information we might be able to figure out. We have a small update. Just this past Sunday, May 19th, the Q Center for Missing Persons, a nonprofit based out of North Carolina, had more than 30 searchers, several cadaver dogs, scent dogs, out at the Hillsborough Civic Center searching for any sign of Amanda Jones.
Yeah, it's almost 14 years later. So your original reports, follow-up reports that you started on last fall, Katie, I think got the ball rolling again. People are talking. So this is kind of what we're hoping to see.
As we remember, the Hillsborough Civic Center is the last place anyone remembers seeing Amanda Jones on August 14th, 2005. The family has been asking for years to have a fresh set of eyes, an outside organization come in and search the Hillsborough Civic Center grounds again, to make sure that all the I's have been dotted, all the T's have been crossed, every stone has been flipped over, just to make sure she's not there.
Right. And they got out there and went at it again.
Yeah. So we had volunteer searchers from several different states. I met a woman from Indiana, several from Illinois, several from here in Missouri, along with the Eureka Fire Protection District Search and Rescue Team. That is a group of volunteers over in Eureka. It's retired law enforcement, retired firefighters, current active firefighters. They were all out there assisting with the search. And then again, some of these incredibly well-trained scent dogs.
Well, you mentioned any possible trace. What could they possibly expect to find, Katie? What were they out there thinking? What was in their heads as they're conducting the search?
You know, you think after all these years, what really could they expect to find? Almost 14 years. What could they really expect to find? I asked Marcia Morton. She was the coordinator of this search. She was a volunteer with the Q Center for Missing Persons. She told me that, they're not necessarily searching for a specific person. I asked them if they had a piece of Amanda's clothing or something specific of Amanda's that they were searching for. She said, no, that was not the case. They were not looking for Amanda specifically. These dogs are all trained to find human remains in various stages of decomposition. So they were out there simply searching for any sign of that. Again, the areas they were searching were these densely wooded, heavy brush areas. They even gave us an exclusive look at what the area looked like that they were going to be searching. If you're watching this podcast, again, this is a visual podcast. If you're watching this podcast rather than listening to it, we'll be giving you a look at what that terrain looks like, what that area of the Hillsborough Civic Center wooded area looks like, that searchers were really heavily focused on during Sunday's search. The day started at about 8:30 in the morning with a butterfly release, and we spoke with Amanda's family. We heard from her mother. I spoke with her sister, Carrie. I think that, they remain hopeful that something new might happen, but I don't think that they were really expecting that anything was going to be found on the Civic Center grounds that day.
And nothing was.
Ultimately, they spent most of the day out there. I followed up with Marcia. She told me that no tangible evidence was recovered during Sunday's search. Not to say that they have completely ruled out any chance that Amanda might be somewhere on those grounds, but it appears unlikely based on the search that they did in the area that they covered on Sunday.
So let's get back into what we do know from that last day.
Amanda and Brian had spent one night together in December of 2004. Amanda told Brian in February of 2005 that she was pregnant. Brian denied being the father. So she went on through the course of her pregnancy, preparing to be a single mother, preparing to raise this child on her own without his help. And in the week or so before she disappeared, she had reached out to him to just let him know, hey, I'm getting close to my due date. I'm having a boy. And do you want to be involved? Do you want me to give the child your last name? He reached out to her in the morning of Sunday, August 14th, 2005, and the two of them agreed to meet at the Hillsborough Civic Center in Hillsborough, Missouri.
Now, the investigation has centered around Brian Westfall, and I think his contention through his attorney would be that that's not necessarily fair. And I think the investigators I know they've never called him a suspect. He's just a person of interest. His name became known because he was the last person to see her alive. And that in and of itself, regardless of anything else, that gives this investigation its initial focus. There are reasons why everything kind of goes back toward him. And the biggest reason of all is just that he's the last person known to have seen her alive.
This past fall, I had an opportunity to speak with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, the lead investigating authority on this case, and the FBI, just to find out more about what was said back then and the day that she went missing and the days after, and what more information they've learned over the years. I spoke with Detective Sergeant Scott Poe from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, who explained to me how they narrowed down their search in those first hours of the investigation.
With this, it was fairly easy. The closest people to her in her life had tried to contact her. Her child was remaining in her parents' custody, and she was 8.5 months pregnant without a vehicle. So that really limited where we could search. So we had to basically go back to where she was last known to be and try to go from there the best we could, but with no direction to lead, that was very difficult.
So going on that then, if you go back to that day, and you go back to the last person she was with, the last person who claims to see her alive.
Yes, ma'am.
And the last location she was. Tell me about the focus and the search around those locations and those people.
Well, it's a that person, if we're being honest. I mean, we all know that. It's a that person. Obviously, that is going to be a focus of our investigative efforts, our interview efforts, because, and that's with anyone. If one person goes missing and only one person was with them and no one else had seen them before or after, and that person's the only one left to talk to, that's simply what we have. Our focus was on that gentleman, absolutely. Right off the bat, it had to be. We had no other option. We did look at other possible avenues, but looking at video systems around, pulling for witnesses the best we could, going to the media, the help of the media as far as getting the story out there, begging for witnesses. Everything came back to just one person, one location.
Tired of wearing lousy, unflattering camis? Meet the Shaperman Shaper Cami, the only
At the end of our last episode, we heard from Amanda's parents, Hugh and Bertha Probst. They told us that when Amanda didn't show up, when she didn't return to them after her scheduled meeting with Brian, they became worried. They searched the phone book. They called every Westfall in the phone book until they finally got a hold of Brian. They spoke to Brian. They say he gave them several different accounts of what happened that day after he and Amanda met at the Civic Center.
Yeah, and that's something investigators seized on. There were discrepancies in the stories coming from him. That's another factor here. So now we have not only just is he the last man to see her alive that we know of, but also his story changes.
Apparently, Miss Probst, Bertha Probst, had been told by this gentleman that he had told her, hey, we went to lunch at Off the Hook restaurant in DeSoto. I dropped her off. That was it. Later, when confronted by Mr. Probst, he recanted that, and in his interview with us said that they did not in fact have lunch. So I don't know what that was, the disparity in that account was.
Did he explain why he said that?
No, he did not. I believe he said that he didn't recall having said that they went to lunch. I think he said they discussed that.
When they weren't satisfied with the answers they were getting from Brian about what had happened that day and where Amanda was, they reached out to law enforcement. Again, here's Detective Sergeant Scott Poe with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office.
So there were some red flags immediately. The deputy that night went out and spoke with the gentleman. His account to the deputy was what it was. We had some disparities there, but it was at that point it's their side versus their, and we can't give credence to either side more than the other until we get some true facts to refute those things and poke the holes in the stories.
So Andy, we obviously see a lot of that in our line of work. You can't take sides, especially in a situation like this where there's paternity being questioned, and you certainly don't want to choose sides. You don't want to give one side more validity than the other. That's why police do their investigating.
Yes, and they're starting from zero. They don't know Amanda Jones, as far as we know. They don't know Brian Westfall. They have no reason to believe one or the other. There are other explanations as to what could have happened to her. So that's what the investigators have to keep in mind. But the more they talk to him, the more he sort of helps spin that focus back onto himself, beyond just him being the last person to see her.
And Andy, let's be clear. Brian Westfall has not said much to police or investigators. He gave them a written statement that night that Amanda disappeared, but almost immediately after that, he hired an attorney. Here's Amanda's father, Hugh Probst.
The story is he got a lawyer that night. The night of the abduction, he got a lawyer. The morning after, his girlfriend got a lawyer. They still have that same lawyer on retainer. Why? After 13 years?
So, Katie, there's another person of interest in all of this. Brian Westfall has a girlfriend who is not Amanda, but Amanda feels she is expecting his baby.
Brian has never spoken to the media. His girlfriend, who we believe is still his girlfriend to this very day, has never spoken to the media. What limited information we have about them and their relationship, we've gotten through law enforcement. To the best of our knowledge, they were a couple when Amanda and Brian met that night of the holiday party at the Civic Center. And they have remained a couple through all of this. Brian Westfall's family hired attorney Kevin Roberts to represent Brian, and he continues to represent Brian to this day. It is my understanding that he also represents Brian's girlfriend.
And I know Kevin Roberts, at least from the time I started covering this story all those years ago, almost 14 years ago now, he's never consented to an interview with me. The most I ever got from him was a statement, and that was it.
And that was the same experience I had with him when anytime I've reached out, is that he has declined to do interviews. He has declined to allow his clients to do interviews, and has only sent me statements continuing to say that Brian Westfall is not the father of this child, and Brian Westfall had no involvement in the disappearance of Amanda Jones. So knowing that you've got two sides to a story, just like you said, Andy, investigators had to start from zero. They had to go back and go through the whole timeline, and nobody disputes what we have already said happened earlier in the day. She got the phone call from Brian. She went to church. She kissed her 4-year-old daughter goodbye, went to Walgreens, went to the Civic Center, 1:00.
To meet Brian. And again, without Brian Westfall talking to us, his girlfriend talking to us, their attorney talking to us. We have none of that. So we go on in our reporting what we know from who's talking. Amanda's family, police investigators, and they sort of lay out what her last hours of known contact with the people she loved were like.
And Brian doesn't dispute that they met at 1:00 that day. So we know they met at 1:00 that day. And we know at 1:15, Amanda Jones received the last phone call received or made from her cell phone on that final day. It was from her former sister-in-law, Rhonda Boyer. I spoke with Rhonda. She describes to us that final phone call.
And she answered very abrupt, and Amanda never had ever spoke to me in that tone or that quickness or that. And I said, hi. She says, hello. And I said, hi, Amanda, it's Rhonda. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, and she goes, I can't talk right now. And I'm like, well, it's okay. I said, I just need to I'm here picking up the order for your party, and I need to know what kind of makeup that you wanted. I don't know. I can't talk right now. I said, can you just tell me the makeup? And she goes, I think it's got an 8 in it or something. Well, she goes, I'll call you back. I said, Amanda, wait. I said, are you in labor? That's how intense she was. She goes, no, I would call you if I was in labor. And I said, okay, hon. She goes, I think it's got an 8 in it or something. I got to go, and hung up. And from what I understand, from what the family, her mom and dad, and the police had told me that was the last phone call. I didn't know that she was with him that day. Had I known that, I would have put 2 and 2 together.
So Rhonda mentioned that there was tension in Amanda's voice, obviously, for all the reasons we continue to state. This was an uncomfortable situation for everyone. There's a child in the mix. The question of paternity is coming up, and it's just uncomfortable.
Right. And Brian Westfall has a girlfriend.
Right.
Aside from Amanda Jones, who is expecting his child, according to her and her family.
Interestingly enough, the only person that has been able to give us or investigators an account of that final meeting is Brian Westfall himself. I spoke with Detective Sergeant Scott Poe, and he describes what happened at that final meeting between him and Amanda.
Apparently during that, she asked if she could give the child his last name. She also had a photo album with pictures of a sonogram, some poems, things like that, trying to inspire him to want to be more involved in the child's life. He apparently refuted that he was the father and told her not to use the name. According to him, she became upset. At one point asked to use the bathroom in the Civic Center, which he allowed. Opened up the Civic Center, allowed her to use the restroom. Said she came back out. They decided they were no longer hungry, didn't want to go to lunch, as they had originally planned.
So around 2:00, Brian tells investigators he went back to work at the horse barn on the Civic Center grounds, and Amanda went to her car.
And if people don't remember or haven't followed in the earlier episodes, the Civic Center is like a fairgrounds, right? They have the county fair there for Jefferson County in Hillsborough. So they have a horse barn. There's a track around the back, a horse track. And one thing that strikes me about what the investigator brings up, and this goes back to my memory of covering this all those years ago, right away, they told us about the last places they were known to have been seen. The Civic Center where they met, and they also mentioned this restaurant called Off the Hook, a fish place outside of town between Hillsborough and DeSoto, Missouri. And that was something we put on the news. They wanted to talk to people who may have seen the cars. All of this stuff went out, right? But you heard him say they decided not to go to lunch. And that's one of those early discrepancies in Brian Westfall's account of Amanda's last known hours that sort of flips this thing back to him again, not just as the last person who saw her, but as someone who maybe is not saying all he knows.
Right, because it eventually investigators determined that the two never left the Civic Center grounds. Surveillance footage at Off the Hook restaurant never shows them there together. And so that's one of many discrepancies that the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office identified as.
Make dinner good tonight with Hardee's new tender platters. Crunchy, juicy chicken dipped in
part of the investigation into he said, she said, and what just didn't quite add up. Here's Detective Sergeant Poe.
The other discrepancy is he says that she was in the car. Adamantly said she was sitting in the car when I left on the phone. Verizon records show that she was not on the phone during that time. Additionally, the people that had been there at 4:30 in the afternoon that did see the vehicle they reported seeing no one in or around the vehicle at the time. They did They were able to corroborate that the gentleman was down near a barn in the horse show grounds where he told us he had been doing work. They said the trailer was empty. However, he came out of the barn when he saw them pull up, appeared to be startled, and said, "Oh, I'm down here loading things." One of the witnesses said he found that odd because there was nothing on the trailer. But other than that, those have been the biggest discrepancies we found in the initial report.
So around 5:30, Brian Westfall says he left the Civic Center property and he saw Amanda Jones sitting in her car in the parking lot talking on the phone.
Some things about that do not add up, right? We've learned there is no record of her making another phone call after that phone call to her former sister-in-law.
Correct.
Right at 1:15, 4 hours earlier. And then there's another thing, Katie, about sitting in her car.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You would presume that if you're sitting in the car, you'd have it running with the air conditioning on in August in mid-southern Missouri, south of St. Louis in August.
8.5 months pregnant or not, you're not sitting in your car with no air conditioning in August.
Her air conditioner didn't work in that car, right? And her family knew that. So there's a few other things that don't add up. There's a lot more to come in our next episodes because the story, it progresses through that first night.
Yeah,
you found out some things about what happened out at Brian Westfall's house that night.
We're going to find out from investigators where Brian Westfall says he went after he left the Civic Center, who saw him once he left, who came to his house later that night before investigators arrived, and then where investigators focused their search in the days after, where they were searched, where they had to get permission to search, where they were not allowed to search, and what they found in the days and weeks following her disappearance.
It's fascinating. There's a lot more to go, a lot more to plow through. And revisiting it all, I just think we're going to get there. We're going to get there.
The FBI is offering a reward of up to $20,000 for information leading to the location of Amanda Jones and her unborn child, and or for information leading to the identity of the person or people involved with their disappearance. We thank you for listening. I'm Katie Corman.
And I'm Andy Banker.
Tribune Audio Network.
I'm never going to give up. I'm never going to give up. We have to find her.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Katie Corman, a reporter for Fox 2 in St. Louis. My colleague Andy Banker and I have been revisiting a missing persons case. Amanda Jones disappeared from Hillsborough, Missouri on August 14th, 2005. She was 8.5 months pregnant at the time she went missing. She has not been heard from or seen since that last day. Her family's still looking for answers.
Yes, and in the course of our earlier podcast episodes here, Katie, we've covered a lot of ground. I've gone back and really tried to go step by step, focusing mostly on her last day, that morning, what she did, where she went, and all the details leading into her final meeting with the last person known to have seen her alive. His name is Brian Westfall, the man she believed to be the father of her unborn child. And up to this point, we've established.
I grew up always on the bigger side as a kid. I was always slightly thicker.
Everything up to the point that the trail runs cold, where we know Brian Westfall and she parted ways somehow, some way, and he left the Civic Center.
So at 5:30-ish on Sunday, August 14th, 2005, Brian Westfall says he was preparing to leave the Civic Center property and he saw Amanda Jones sitting in her car in the parking lot on the phone.
Which evidence seems to suggest that she was not there, or at least she was not on the phone.
Correct. Verizon records show no calls were accepted to her phone after that 1:15 call she received from her former sister-in-law. So we know that she did not answer or make any calls after that point, and so she could not have been sitting on the phone at 5:30 on that day.
Yes, that was 1:15 in the afternoon, and then we're talking more than 4 hours later. Mr. Westfall thought, at least, that he saw her sitting in her car on the telephone. But where did he go after that?
We heard from Detective Sergeant Scott Poe from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office a lot in our last episode. We're going to continue learning more information from him about the rest of that evening and the days following. Detective Sergeant Poe says that after Brian left the Civic Center grounds, he went to the Hillsborough Fire Department, spoke with a captain there for about 10 to 15 minutes before leaving and then heading home. And law enforcement did speak with that captain at the Hillsborough Fire Department, confirms that he and Brian did see each other, did speak that day, and that Brian was alone when he arrived at their department.
So that part checks out. As we've talked about in earlier episodes, other things he initially said about his meeting with Amanda didn't necessarily check out. The story kind of changed, or maybe he told her parents one thing and told investigators another. But that part of it checked out, and then he went home. And there's some information, some interesting things about what happened that night at home. And I believe, Katie, the things that happened, he got home that night, were sort of set in motion the day before.
After Brian left the Hillsborough Fire Department, he headed home, and Detective Sergeant Sco tells us that he was visited by his girlfriend, Stephanie Voltrain.
There was something that maybe you would say raises eyebrows about Rubbermaid tubs, and he requested those be brought to his house.
Here's Detective Sergeant Poe.
He did have a girlfriend at the time. He'd known her about 4 years. He did some business dealings with her as well. He boarded her horses. They would speak daily. I know she was initially cooperative, talked to us, agreed to speak with us, and said that she had spoke to him the night on the 13th and says she would be coming down after work the following day. She was asked to grab some Rubbermaid style totes and bring down to the property on Sunday. She said they were for the horse trailer to put tackle in. I suppose from what I understand, Mr. Westfall said she said the old totes were no longer, I guess they were dated, no longer sufficient. So that being said, she went down there that evening. About forgot what time it was there about an hour. I think she got down there about 8:30. Was there for about an hour left. She knew nothing about Miss Jones, had never heard her name, anything, till she saw the news coverage the following day.
So Andy, if you'll remember, I believe we've covered this before, but this is the woman that Brian Westfall was dating when he met Amanda Jones in December of 2004.
Yes, and you wonder, when if someone has a motive to see to it that Amanda disappears. I mean, that's what police are looking at. You can't get around it. That's what part of the investigation is. And is there any potential motive here with the nature of the relationships of Brian Westfall, having a girlfriend and then having a night with Amanda that the girlfriend supposedly knew nothing about? How was that worked out? Was that a factor as we're going into this last day?
Here's Detective Sergeant Scott Poe with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. She was in the area on that day.
She had come down that evening, yes, ma'am. Which is another thing that complicated us to say that anything bad had happened at the home and thereby get a search warrant, is because there were other people at the home. His mother, his father, her on the property that had never seen anyone there.
Fair to say, though, that she may have had some sort of interest in seeing this
problem go away?
One could say that if there was a problem, she could have interest in Mr. Westfall's well-being. Sure. She initially was upset that she hadn't known anything about Miss Jones for obvious reasons. They reconciled that. We went to speak to her further, and at that point, she stated she didn't want to speak to us without a lawyer. So there's been no significant additional interviews.
Hiring an attorney, not an admission of guilt, but I think a lot of people have a lot of questions for these two individuals about why they haven't spoken with investigators since 2005. And wouldn't it just be easier for them to cooperate?
And be more open about it, and maybe even talk to us. And their attorney, Kevin Roberts, who we're told is still on a retainer, still representing them. The only thing we've ever gotten from him, no interview, just this statement. I'll read it again. I am confident whatever forensic testing is performed, it will substantiate that Mr. Westfall has done nothing wrong and is in no way responsible for Miss Jones' disappearance. Mr. Westfall and his family, as I'm sure many others are, continue to pray for Miss Jones' safe return. That's the entirety of the statement from the attorney for Brian Westfall and Stephanie Voltrain.
I got a couple of similar statements from Kevin Roberts during my reporting in the last few months, but all saying the same thing. Brian's not the baby's father. He was not involved in her disappearance. They're not interested in doing any sort of media interviews, which is their right. And we can't fault them for that.
You don't have to prove you're innocent. That kind of goes in to the nature of the searches that were conducted after Amanda disappeared. They know the last person to have seen her alive, but they have no evidence to call him a suspect, right? There's just some hearsay, some circumstantial stuff.
So let's get into what has been done in terms of interviews, searches, what law enforcement has accomplished, has been able to rule out in their investigation. Tell me about the searches you remember from back in 2005.
Yeah, we've spoken about this in an earlier episode or two, that I remember just sort of staking out investigators and following them around and seeing where they were going. And 9 days in to the search, into the investigation into Amanda's disappearance, I can take this right out of one of my reports. There are K-9 units from Ferguson, which is in St. Louis County, north of the city of St. Louis, maybe an hour away from Hillsborough, the city of St. Louis, a police helicopter crew, a search boat, and a dozen or more investigators rolled out of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. They wouldn't say where they were going. I remember a phone call from one of the investigators asking me to back off because they did not, it might jeopardize the investigation if we released what they were looking at. They didn't say anything about really what they found, but the sheriff at the time, Glenn Boyer, said, "We'll go anywhere. We don't care, no matter how crazy it might seem. Someone calls in a tip, we're going to check it out." At that point, in those first 9 days, they told me that they had 150 leads, and they considered all of them essentially gold. They were going to check them all.
We're not eliminating any lead, no matter how far-fetched. I mean, we've had people call us that they've had dreams and dream that she was in a certain area. And I mean, certainly, even though it's far-fetched, we're going to check that out.
So, Andy, it sounds like they were willing to investigate you heard even people that were having dreams about where Amanda was. They were willing to check those.
Yes.
Those out.
Yes. And, in the course of all of this, you reported the recent development in recent weeks on Fox 2 News in St. Louis that an outside group conducted another search of the Civic Center. Well, even 13 plus years ago, investigators went back there again and again. The Hillsborough Civic Center, the last place anyone was known to have seen Amanda. They went back. They reportedly used equipment in the bathrooms to back with dogs. They searched rural areas around the Civic Center. They didn't find anything.
So let's get back to Detective Sergeant Scott Poe. I want everyone to hear from him about just how extensive these searches were by air, by ground, just the amount of resources that were invested, the scope of the investigation, the boots on the ground aspect. He describes it more thoroughly than even you and I could.
We had an inordinate amount of manpower thrown at that from us, other agencies, specialized units, doing grid searches. They penetrated your radar. They did cadaver dog searches. As I mentioned before, craft, we're up using the flare system. We did everything we could look for earth, which they were doing various construction projects around the area, so that wouldn't have necessarily been telltale. But when we did see things that begged more concern, we've excavated holes in the area. We did everything we could think of at the time to do. We set up surveillance countermeasures at those places in case anyone was to return there for any reason. We had manpower sitting on it. We had electronic surveillance in place. We spent quite a bit of time on what we had, and at the time that's what we had. So we had to work with that. They walked along the banks of the big river, the property that led up to the residence the gentleman lives at, his property. River accesses in the area, the quarry down the road. They walked the entire length between the quarry and that residence, or that property, I'm sorry. Several officers and women just out there in the middle of August, and countless times since.
So Andy, obviously they searched high and low, and again, never found a trace of Amanda Jones. But
no living being should ever eat processed food for every single meal of their life.
there was one place that they wanted to search more extensively and were granted limited permission. Talk to me about that.
It was Brian Westfall's property, which is closer to DeSoto, which is, some distance from Hillsboro, where the Civic Center was, and the last place Amanda was known to be seen. So they did a consent search. Westfall consented. He agreed to allow them to search certain things or areas. And at the time, this was a big development in the story, right, in our early coverage of this. And I think investigators were expecting to maybe find at least something to go on, maybe some DNA. I know they were looking for it. I can remember the sheriff talking to me about searching a vehicle. They reported they picked up 18 items of evidence from searches of the Civic Center, Westfall's property, but they weren't specific about what that evidence might be. And there was no connection between it ever that was established that might, take you a few steps further down the road. Into figuring out what happened to Amanda Jones.
And let's elaborate a little further. To the best of our knowledge, Brian Westfall's family owns several hundred acres of property in that area. It is a vastly spread out piece of land, combination of farmland. They have some cattle. They have, I believe there's some wooded areas. There's a lot of property there. So when you say that Westfall's attorney and the Westfalls themselves agreed to a consent search, we're not talking about all of the property, are we?
No, there wasn't a massive search team going out there with grids on a map and picking out sectors like we've seen for, for other missing people or lost children. They didn't have ATV scouring the property. They didn't take shovels and picks and backhoes and bulldozers. None of that stuff. Now, they weren't specific about exactly what they were allowed to search, but the searches proved fruitless.
Here is Special Agent Michael Christian from the FBI explaining that consent search a little further.
Within a day or two after Amanda was reported missing, there was a search conducted on Brian Westfall's property. It was a consent search that Brian agreed to. However, it was limited. So Brian Westfall told the law enforcement officers where they could search. So it was a limited search.
But that seems a little backwards.
Well, we didn't have a search warrant. So if you're doing a consensual search, I mean, it's where the consenting party tells you you can search. Yeah.
It just seems a little backwards that somebody who might have been involved in, and again, innocent until proven guilty, but somebody who was the last person to see this woman alive sort of dictates, well, you can search this area and you can search that area because hypothetically I hid her in this area.
Sure. If we're going to search a property with a search warrant, we need to have evidence that a crime's been committed at that location. So, I mean, if all you have at that point is a consent search, that's what you have to do.
So, Katie, you got these interviews with the FBI and with the detective sergeant from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department last fall. You got a lot further down the road than we did at the time, when the investigation was just in its infancy. But the same question then, I think, is one you had now. Why just limit it to a consent search that Westfall agrees to?
Yeah, a lot of people go back to, why didn't they get a search warrant to search Brian's property? Didn't he have motive to want Amanda to go away if, in fact, he was the father of that child and he didn't want to be the father of that child, didn't want her to have that child? So I asked Special Agent Michael Christian with the FBI about search warrants and motive. Here's what he had to say.
What do you need to be able to get a search warrant to search a property?
Well, just in general terms, to get a search warrant, you have to establish a crime's been committed, first of all. And then you have to establish that evidence of that crime, that there's probable cause to believe evidence of that crime is in the area or location or object that you want to search.
Does a person's means or motive factor into being able to get a search warrant?
Every instance is going to be different. It could go into that, but you just have to look at the evidence as a whole and just see what it is for that specific case, whether there's enough to get a search warrant.
So is it fair to say that investigators maybe didn't think that Brian Westfall had a motive in this case?
Well, I mean, just based on this, anyone could suggest that his motive would be that he did not want to have a child. So that could be a motive, sure.
But that would not be a strong enough indicator to have a search for his property.
A motive on its own is not going to be enough to get a search warrant.
And Andy, let's remember the last place Amanda was seen was the Hillsborough Civic Center. And witnesses saw Brian Westfall leave the Civic Center property, and they said he was alone when he left. So there's no proof really that Amanda ever left that property, which is why investigators have focused so much on searching the Civic Center and searching the area around the Civic Center. They cannot prove that she ever went to Brian Westfall's home that day, which is why they cannot get a search warrant to search that property.
Yeah, legally, that's a big hurdle to cross.
So here's Detective Sergeant Scott Poe explaining that aspect of the investigation a little further.
We need to be able to say that we have more to believe that she went to that home. But you got to remember the timeline he provided, even witnesses place him still at the horse show grounds and her car still there. So there's nothing to ever say he left before the time he said he had with anybody. And then after leaving, we were able to corroborate he did in fact stop by the firehouse and no one was with him. And that was on his way home. When someone grants consent, there's a few stipulations to that. They have to be able to revoke that consent as well. We're there essentially as a courtesy. They don't have to let us there. They know that legally they're not bound to. A contingent on that is that we have to stop when they tell us to, and we can only go where they let us, which is frustrating. Absolutely. Would I love to go do and this is something I've talked to some people close to Ms. Jones about before. I would love to go and do a complete thorough search of everything. Unfortunately, the law doesn't allow me to do that. And when someone has a lawyer and are adamant all contact goes through the lawyer, I can't keep There's certain rules to how often I can approach, how I can approach. So I get their frustration, the loved ones, and I absolutely do. But the law binds us in a lot of ways.
So I think you can hear a little bit of the frustration in Detective Sergeant Poe's voice in that last piece of that interview. And I felt it. And I think it's a thing that a lot of us feel with this case. And it's easy to get emotional about this case because of the circumstances, because it's a young, pregnant woman, because there's two lives in the mix here. And I think because it's gone on so long, a lot of people feel the frustration.
Yes. And they have to put themselves into Brian Westfall's shoes, right? And they have to accept what he has told them. Imagine if you were him and you had nothing to do with her disappearance and your name is connected with this for all of these years. And there is no physical evidence to this day that you have had any connection to the disappearance of Amanda Jones. And yet the whole thing keeps circling around you. So he would be frustrated too.
In our telling of this story and the revisiting of this case, we do not intend to point fingers, to place fault, to place blame. We are simply revisiting the facts as we know them to be true and just hoping again and again that new information will come to light, that new evidence will come forward, new information, that people will continue talking about this in hopes that we can get some answers.
Yes, we certainly, after close to 14 years, still have no named suspect in the disappearance of Amanda Jones, but we certainly have the victims. Amanda, her unborn child, her daughter, her parents, her sister, all her families and friends who loved her. They are the victims. And for all of those people, this has got to come to an end.
The FBI is offering a reward of up to $20,000 for information leading to the location of Amanda Jones and her unborn child, and or for information leading to the identity of the person or people involved with their disappearance. We thank you for listening. I'm Katie Corman.
And I'm Andy Banker.
Tribune Audio Network.
I'm never going to give up. I'm never going to give up. We have to find her.
I'm Katie Corman, a reporter for Fox 2 in St. Louis, Missouri. My colleague Andy Banker and I are revisiting a missing persons case from our area going on 14 years now. Amanda Jones was a 26-year-old woman from Jefferson County, Missouri, and she disappeared on August 14th, 2005. Amanda was 8.5 months pregnant when she went missing. She has not been seen or heard from ever since that day.
In episode 4, we went through those searches in as much detail as we possibly could. One thing I keep going back to, Katie, and that Amanda's family keeps going back to, is that
this is Robin, a 53-year-old with a 6-month transformation, eating twice the amount.
these searches were limited. Why weren't they more extensive? There was, the person of interest in the case we keep going back to, his name was Brian Westfall. Amanda believed he was the father of her unborn child, which was to be a boy. She was going to name Hayden, a little brother for her daughter, Hannah. Westfall was the last person known to be with Amanda, to see her. And that was at the Hillsborough Civic Center. And there were extensive searches all around the Civic Center. One of them just recently in the wake of your reporting here. But at the time, more immediate to her disappearance, they searched nearby rivers, river banks, lakes, ponds, all around the Civic Center. And the one place they really wanted to search, the investigators, that is, was Brian Westfall's property.
And ultimately, neither Brian nor his girlfriend nor his parents have spoken with investigators in the months and years following those initial conversations. All of this creating a lot of frustration in the family. The
Yes.
family is very frustrated with the lack of movement in this case by investigators, by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, by the FBI. They say they've reached out hundreds, if not thousands of occasions over the years via phone, via snail mail, via email to try and get answers, get updates.
Right. And I covered this from the very beginning. And that distrust among family members and investigators started building almost from day one. Why not devote more resources to it? I mean, it seems like the goal has been met. The information is spinning and people are, there are loose lips out there, people telling what they know, but the family has grown frustrated that it just doesn't seem like that carries much weight with investigators, or at least not as much weight as they hoped it would.
I spoke with Amanda's parents, Hugh and Bertha Probst, just about their communication with law enforcement over the years and maybe why it has created such frustration among them and the other family members.
I mean, anytime you try to contact them, you get the same answers.
If you get an answer at all.
We don't have any new evidence. I can't conjure up evidence. I can't create evidence. Well, we're not asking them to do that. I want to know, what are you doing to get that evidence? So I figure until somebody comes forward and says something, they're not going to do anything. I mean, you got to figure we're the victims here.
But we're ignorant and incompassionate.
And it's a crying shame that we live in America and our laws are like this, to where if you get a lawyer, you don't have to speak. So he could have this lawyer to the day he dies and never have to speak.
So Andy, obviously the family is frustrated with the way the communication has gone with law enforcement over the years. But I think that the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, the law enforcement that's been involved with this case is probably equally as frustrated that they haven't made progress on this case, that it seems like it should be one that could be easily solved. But as we mentioned in episode 4, the law binds them in a lot of ways. There's only so much they can do. And I bet that's created a lot of frustration for them as well.
It has. And they hear what the family hears too, right? They know what people are saying, but what people are saying and what you can back up with facts are two vastly different things. And there is frustration on both ends. And I think they all wish we weren't still here because, right now, this family is in the same position that they were the day Amanda went missing. They are having to live with this 14 years later.
So Andy, let's talk about those searches. The search is kind of wrapping up and in come the vigils and the memorial events.
Yeah. I mean, I remember covering the earliest vigils and prayer services and balloon releases. And it just feels like, a great momentum is building and big find or some, there's going to be a big turn in the investigation that solves the case, that cracks the case, that leads to Amanda. Just never happened. And I remember covering one, then another, and then years later. So she disappeared in 2005. In 2007, going back to a county fair at the fairgrounds where she was last seen alive in Hillsborough. And there's a big Amanda Jones banner missing. And we did a report out there with the sole aim to try and stoke that fire again, get people talking again.
Ma'am, would you help me find my daughter, please?
We're still trying to find my daughter.
No big new leads, no key new strategy for Joan's parents.
I just tell them, help me find my daughter, please.
That's good.
Just 1,500 flyers, a big new banner, and a hunch. Maybe out there amid the kiddie rides and carnival games lies the solution to what happened to Amanda.
Thousands of people will be here this weekend, so we really want to get our message out. We want to bring Amanda home, and somebody, maybe it's somebody coming to the fair, maybe it's somebody that sees this broadcast tonight, maybe they have the information.
Hopefully somebody remembers something.
Already, one who received a flyer said he'd seen someone who looked like Amanda recently.
He said, oh, I think I've seen her at Chesterfield Mall.
You hear somebody call their friend or there's whoever they're with, Amanda or Mandy, is that my Mandy?
His Mandy was last seen at these same fairgrounds August 14th, 2005. 8 months pregnant, her car left right out front just after she'd stopped at a Walgreens.
I'll never give up. I'll never give up. If I live to be 100 and she's still not missing, I'll never give up. She's someplace. And if she's gone, then let me know she's gone. We just need to know that.
It's been a long time. I can't believe they haven't found her yet.
Yeah, this may have been hard to fathom when she first disappeared, but now is the time, Jefferson County Fair 2007, to start thinking about this face again and to start remembering there's a $100,000 reward. So maybe this banner won't have to fly at the Jefferson County Fair 2008. In Hillsborough, Andy Banker, Fox 2 News. And that was only 2 years after her disappearance. And now we're at 14.
And as this family feels, stuck in time, waiting for answers, the rest of the world is kind of gone on.
Yeah.
Even this family, the life moments have continued to go on, even without Amanda and baby Hayden there. Holidays, birthdays, big momentous occasions,
Weddings, pregnancies, right? And that just, I think a pregnancy is especially sensitive because Amanda was so close to giving birth and the family was looking so forward to it. And then in the course of your file reports here, you talked to her sister who was going through that big life moment herself, Amanda's little sister.
Yeah, Carrie told me about after she got married and found out she was going to be a mother and what that moment was like for her. Here's Amanda's sister, Carrie Alfred.
And when I went in to find out I was pregnant, and my husband was with me, and they did an ultrasound, and all I see is this little bitty baby on the screen, the heart's beating. Oh, I cried. I mean, I and my OB was so excited. She goes, "Yay, we have a heartbeat!" And I would just start crying. And my husband's like, "Oh my gosh, can I take a picture of that?" And and it was great. And I remember thinking, I wish I could call Amanda. I wish I could call her and tell her you're going to be an aunt. But I never got a chance. She never got to hear me say those words. Ever.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here. Big Wireless has once again raised their price. In response,
Gosh, you could tell that Carrie was just so sad that she wasn't able to call her big sister and tell her to be a mother, you're going to be an aunt. And I met Carrie's best friend, Pamela, is Carrie's daughter's godmother. And I got to meet her during the course of my reporting as well. And she said to me, Amanda should be the godmother of Carrie's daughter. And if at any point back through the door, I would gladly relinquish the godmother duties over to Amanda. But in the meantime, she said, I'm going to do my best to be the best godmother I can be in Amanda's absence.
Yes. I remember when Carrie was getting married, obviously before she was ever going to become a mother, Amanda wasn't there. She would have been the maid of honor. She would be the godmother. Weddings, baptisms, ultrasounds, births, birthdays, all of that. This family goes on and go on without really the one they sort of look to as their fearless leader. You know, Amanda wasn't just part of the family. She was the glue. And how do you keep it together when the glue is gone?
And let's continue to remind ourselves that in all of this, Amanda left behind a 4-year-old daughter, Hannah, who lost her mother, lost her baby brother in the same day. Now she's 18.
18 now. I remember when she was 11, I was contacted. Someone wrote a small book for people, children who have been through loss, and it was called Hope for Hannah. It was not a factual account based on Hannah's life, but obviously that name certainly touched some heartstrings. And there was a note from Hannah that the family gave me when they let me know about this book coming out. It says, "My name is Hannah. I'm 11 years old. 6 years ago, my mom and baby brother disappeared. For 6 years, I have been without them. For 6 years, I have missed them. One day, I hope they come back to me. Hannah." That was when she was 11.
I got to meet Hannah last fall. She was a senior in high school. On the dance team, thinking about college. And I had an opportunity to sit down with her and talk to her about what she remembers and how this has impacted her over the years. Here's the story I reported for Fox 2 about Amanda's daughter, Hannah Jones. It's been 13 years since Hannah Jones saw her mother.
Yeah, it's still hard for like our entire family because we just don't have any answers from anyone. So it's hard.
Hannah was 4 years old when her mother, Amanda Jones, vanished.
I don't remember much from when I was 4, but I do remember that she called me her princess and I called her my angel.
Hannah holds tight to those memories and to the last keepsake she got from her mother.
She gave me a teddy bear when we went on our family vacation together.
Then 26-year-old Amanda was 8.5 months pregnant when she disappeared, August 14th, 2005.
She was a loving person. She was really nice and she just loved other people and loved me and was excited to have another baby.
The case has stumped police for more than a decade. Both the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department and the FBI say Brian Westfall remains a focus of the case. Amanda's family and police say Amanda met Westfall at her company's holiday party in December 2004. The two went home together that night, but the relationship ended there. In February, Amanda took Hannah with her to the Hillsborough Civic Center to tell Westfall she was pregnant.
We went there and met Brian Westfall, and him and my mom were going to talk about my brother. And my mom asked if he would have any part in my brother's life. And he said no. And he said that he would pay for an abortion. And I told him that you wouldn't hurt my baby.
Hannah never got to meet her baby brother, Hayden Lucas. Just a week before she was scheduled to give birth, Amanda again met Westfall at the Civic Center. She came home. Westfall has never spoken to the media, and according to the sheriff's office, has not spoken with law enforcement since 2005. Westfall's attorney tells me Mr. Westfall has always denied being involved in any way with Ms. Jones' disappearance and denied being the father of her child. After Hannah's mother vanished, she lived with her father until his death a few years later. Hannah has lived with grandparents, Amanda's parents, ever since.
Where do you find your strength?
In my family.
How do they help you?
By talking about it.
What would it mean to you to have some answers?
A lot. I just want to know what happened to her and where she's at.
Despite the heartache Hannah has lived with for the past 13 years, she says she's doing okay. She's on the dance team at school. She likes spending time with her friends, and she's preparing for college, where she plans to study nursing.
I like the medical field a lot, and I want to be a pediatric nurse because I like babies.
But even her future reminds her of the past. what she lost, and the answers she's longing to find.
She's so gone and she's not here. And that I didn't have a brother. And that I don't have a mom anymore. And then I just miss her. And I miss my brother.
Where do you think your mom is today?
I'm not sure, but I think she's in heaven right now.
Wow. Every time I see that, see the tears in that young lady's eyes, and just hear her voice and hear her wanting for her mom and her brother. And then hear her say she thinks her mom's in heaven. That's why we're doing this. She needs answers. Her parents need answers. Everyone just needs answers about Amanda. And it's not just you and I, Katie. I mean, our boss here at Fox 2 has never let go of this. And when you talk to people on the street, they remember. And when this comes at them now through our podcast, they're like, oh my gosh, she's never been found.
I still have a hard time watching that story and not getting emotional and choked up, just knowing, have the opportunity to meet Hannah and seeing just how much this still impacts her. I say still, I don't mean it as like it's surprising, but it just to emphasize that no matter how much time has passed, this is still very real and raw for this young lady and for the rest of Amanda's family. This is devastating, and this has changed them. It has changed their family, and it's not fair.
It's a tough interview to do, and I know you don't want to drag her through, but you're not dragging her through anything that she doesn't think about every single day. You know, it's just always there. It always is. And you're right. It's not fair for a 4-year-old to turn 18 and all that time in between, have this as part of her life. They haven't been alone. They've had a lot of support.
Amanda's family has done a lot of media interviews over the years. They have spoken to Fox 2 and other local media outlets regularly anytime there's an opportunity to revisit the case. They've spoken with some national media outlets about the case and just continuing to try and keep Amanda's name out there. They started a Facebook page, quite a following now, and regularly people are posting and commenting and sharing ideas and theories and information they've heard.
They're part of this, sad fellowship of other people. But there is that, and that is a form of support. And so is the media coverage. We're not going to stop. Since we started these podcasts, it has breathed some new life into this investigation, right? There was another search at the Civic Center. People have come forward to you and I with information they think maybe hasn't been thoroughly looked at. We have forwarded that to the FBI and other investigators working the case. So there is still hope for answers.
On that Facebook page, they share other articles, news stories about missing people from all over the country, children, men, women.
Yeah, and Amanda's parents will tell you there is sort of a kinship, certainly a bond, and it is in many ways heartbreaking, but it is there. Here are Amanda's parents once again.
To this day, my heart goes out to families who go through something like this, because I know how they feel. I know what they're going through.
There's an emptiness there.
I've told people, I said, the unknown is worse than death itself. If she would have died,
It would have been easier.
It'd been easier, because we've been able to say goodbye to her. We've been able to know what happened to her. At this rate, we know nothing.
Yeah, like they said there, Katie, just that knowing nothing That's the hardest part. 14 years almost to know nothing, to just have your daughter walk out of your life.
And Andy, we are within a month of the 14-year anniversary of the disappearance of Amanda Jones. In episode 6, as we prepare to wrap up this series, we'll have an updated conversation with Amanda's parents just to talk about what this last year has been like as we've revisited this case, talked to the family, talked to law enforcement, and talked to them about how they're feeling today. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $20,000 for information leading to the location of Amanda Jones and her unborn child, and or for information leading to the identity of the person or people involved with their disappearance. We thank you for listening. I'm Katie Corman.
And I'm Andy Banker.